It was late October in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, and the rain had been falling for 6 days straight, turning the hillsides into saturated sponges of mud and rock. Sarah Mitchell was 32 years old, a single mother to Emma, a bright-eyed 4-year-old who loved to collect leaves and ask questions about everything. They lived in a small rental house at the base of a wooded slope, about 20 miles outside of Charleston, where Sarah worked double shifts as a waitress at a truck stop diner just to keep the lights on. The house was old, the paint was peeling, and the roof leaked in 3 places, but it was theirs for now, and Sarah did everything she could to make it feel like home. She wasn't religious, not really. She'd grown up going to church on Sundays with her grandmother, but after Emma's father left when she was 6 months pregnant, after her mother died of cancer 2 years later, after every prayer seemed to bounce off the ceiling and fall back down unanswered, Sarah stopped believing that God cared about people like her. She still prayed sometimes, out of habit, out of desperation, but it felt like talking to an empty room. That Thursday afternoon, Sarah came home early because the diner had lost power from the storm. Emma was at the neighbor's house, old Mrs. Callahan, who watched her for free because she said Emma reminded her of her own granddaughter. Sarah was supposed to pick her up at 5, but the rain was getting worse. The wind was howling through the trees, and she wanted to grab a quick shower and maybe lie down for 20 minutes before heading back out into the weather. By the way, before I keep going, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening to this story from. She turned on the hot water, let it run until steam filled the tiny bathroom, and stepped in, closing her eyes and letting the warmth soak into her tired muscles. She stayed there for maybe 10 minutes, just breathing, just existing, and when she finally turned off the water and reached for her towel, she heard it. A sound like thunder, but deeper, longer, angrier, like the mountain itself was groaning in pain. Sarah froze with the towel in her hand, water dripping down her back. The house shook, not violently, but enough to rattle the mirror on the wall. "What the hell?" she whispered. And then the shaking got worse, much worse, and she heard a crash from the living room, the sound of glass breaking, wood splintering, and then a roar so loud it felt like the world was ending. Sarah grabbed her robe, threw it on, and ran out of the bathroom. The living room was gone, just gone. The entire back wall had collapsed inward, and mud was pouring through like a living thing, thick and dark and relentless. The couch was buried, the TV was smashed, and the floor was tilting under her feet. "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God!" Sarah ran toward the front door, but before she could reach it, the floor gave way completely. She fell, not down, but forward, as the entire house folded in on itself and was swallowed by the landslide. She tried to scream, but her mouth filled with mud, cold and suffocating and everywhere. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't tell which way was up, and then something massive hit her from behind and everything went black. When Sarah woke up, she was on her side, curled into a tight ball, and she couldn't move. She tried to open her eyes, but there was mud pressed against her face, in her nose, in her ears, coating her skin like a second layer. She tried to scream, but the sound died in her throat because there was pressure everywhere, crushing pressure on her chest, her legs, her arms, like being buried under 1,000 blankets made of stone. Panic hit her like lightning, sharp and electric, and she thrashed, trying to move anything. But nothing responded except the pain that shot through her ribs when she tried to expand her lungs. She was buried, completely buried, under the mud and debris of her own house, and she had no idea how deep. She tried to think, tried to focus, but the only thought that kept repeating in her mind was Emma. Emma was at Mrs. Callahan's house. Emma was safe. Emma was okay. Please God, let Emma be okay. Sarah forced herself to stop moving and just breathe, slow, shallow breaths through her nose, because that was all she could manage, and she tried to assess her situation. She couldn't see anything, not even a sliver of light, which meant she was deep, really deep. She couldn't hear anything except the muffled sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Her right arm was pinned under her body, her left arm was bent at an awkward angle above her head, and her legs were tangled together like they'd been tied. She tried to wiggle her fingers and felt a small pocket of space near her left hand, maybe the size of a grapefruit, and she realized that was the only reason she could breathe at all. There was a tiny air pocket trapped in the debris around her face. How long would the air last? An hour, 2 hours? She didn't know, but she knew it wasn't long. Sarah closed her eyes, even though it made no difference in the darkness, and she prayed, really prayed for the first time in years. God, if you're there, if you can hear me, please don't let me die like this. Please, I have a daughter. She needs me. She's only 4 years old. She can't lose me. Please, God, please, I know I haven't talked to you in a long time. I know I stopped believing, but please, please, I'm begging you, don't let me die here. Her voice was barely a whisper, more thought than sound, and the words felt heavy and hopeless even as she said them. An hour passed, or maybe 3. Time meant nothing in the suffocating darkness, where every second felt like an eternity. Sarah's lungs burned from the effort of breathing through the small pocket of stale air, and her body ached from being pressed into the same position without any ability to move or shift. She tried calling for help a few times, screaming as loud as she could manage, but the sound was swallowed by the mud, and she knew that no one could hear her. No one even knew she was down here. The neighbors probably thought she was still at work. Mrs. Callahan was probably wondering why she hadn't come to pick up Emma yet, and Emma, sweet Emma, was probably asking where Mommy was and when she was coming home. The thought broke something inside Sarah, and she started to cry, not loud sobbing but silent tears that mixed with the mud on her face. She thought about Emma's laugh, the way she said, "I love you, Mommy," every single night before bed, the way she held Sarah's hand when they crossed the street, and Sarah realized with crushing clarity that she was never going to see her daughter again. She was going to die here, alone in the dark, and Emma was going to grow up without a mother, just like Sarah had grown up without one. "I'm so sorry, baby," Sarah whispered into the darkness, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm so sorry I can't come home." And then she thought about God again, about all the times she'd prayed and felt nothing, all the times she'd needed help and gotten silence. And anger flared up inside her chest, hot and bitter. "Where were you?" she said out loud, her voice stronger now despite the mud. "Where were you when I needed you? Where were you when Emma's father left? Where were you when my mom died? Where are you now? Why do you let this happen to people? Why do you let us suffer?" She waited, half expecting something, anything, but there was only silence and darkness, and the growing certainty that she was going to suffocate in the next few minutes. The air in the small pocket was running out. She could feel it. Each breath was harder than the last, and her head was starting to swim with dizziness. Sarah closed her eyes and stopped fighting. She let her body relax as much as it could in the crushing space, and she whispered one last prayer. "Take care of Emma, please. Make sure someone takes care of my little girl." And then the darkness got darker, and Sarah felt herself slipping away. When Sarah opened her eyes again, she wasn't buried anymore. She was standing in a field of tall grass under a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The sun was warm on her skin, and there was a breeze that smelled like wildflowers and summer rain. She looked down at herself and saw that she was clean, completely clean. No mud, no blood, no torn robe, just her standing in jeans and a t-shirt she hadn't worn in years. "Am I dead?" she said out loud. "Not yet." The voice came from behind her, and Sarah spun around so fast she almost lost her balance. There was a man standing about 10 feet away, maybe in his early 30s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile that made her feel like she'd known him her whole life. He was wearing simple clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, and he was barefoot in the grass. Sarah stared at him, her heart pounding. "Who are you?" He took a step closer, still smiling. "You know who I am, Sarah?" She shook her head, backing up. "No, I don't. I've never seen you before in my life." "Yes, you have. You just don't remember. You were 3 years old, and you fell off the swing set in your backyard, and I was there. You were 16, and you almost drove your car into a ditch because you were crying too hard to see, and I was there. You were in labor with Emma, and you thought you were going to die, and I was there." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "You're not real. This isn't real. I'm hallucinating because I'm dying." He didn't look offended, just sad in a way that made her chest ache. "You've thought that about me for a long time, haven't you? That I'm not real." "Are you?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. "Are you real? Because if you are, if you're really who I think you're saying you are, then I have some questions. I know you do." "Then answer them," Sarah shouted, and all the anger and pain and grief she'd been holding for years came pouring out. "Why did you let this happen? Why did you let that mountain come down on my house? Why did you let Emma's father leave? Why did you take my mother? Why do you let bad things happen to people who are just trying to survive? Where the hell have you been?" He listened to every word without interrupting, without defending himself. And when she finally ran out of breath and stood there shaking with emotion, he spoke quietly. "I've been right here, Sarah. I've always been right here." "That's not good enough," she yelled. "That's not an answer. I know it doesn't feel like it, but I was there every single time. I was in the nurse who held your hand when Emma was born. I was in Mrs. Callahan, who watches your daughter for free because she loves you both. I was in every single tip that was just enough to pay the electric bill. I was in every morning that you woke up and chose to keep going even when you wanted to give up." Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "That's not you. That's just people being people." "Is it?" He took another step closer. "You remember the night 2 months ago when you sat in your car after your shift, and you were so tired you couldn't even cry anymore, and you prayed, you said, 'I can't do this anymore, I need help,' and the next day your boss gave you those extra shifts without you even asking?" She remembered. She remembered perfectly. That was just coincidence. Was it? He was standing right in front of her now, close enough that she could see the warmth in his eyes. "Sarah, do you remember the morning Emma was born, when you held her for the first time, and you whispered, 'Help me be good enough for her'?" Sarah's voice broke. "Yes. I heard you. I've heard every prayer you've ever said, even the ones you didn't say out loud, even the ones you didn't think counted as prayers. I've been listening the whole time." "Then why didn't you answer?" she whispered. "I did. You just didn't recognize my voice. You were looking for thunder when I was speaking in whispers. You were looking for miracles when I was working through the ordinary, everyday moments of people choosing to love each other." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to push him away, but something in his voice made her stop. "Who are you, really?" He smiled, and it was the saddest, most beautiful smile she'd ever seen. "I'm the one who's been carrying you when you thought you were walking alone. I'm the one who's been holding Emma in my hands since the day she was born. I'm the one who loves you more than you could ever imagine, and I'm the one who's not going to let you die in that mud." "But I am dying. I can't breathe. There's no way out." "There's always a way, Sarah. I am the way." He reached out and took her hand, and the moment their fingers touched, she felt it, warmth and peace and love, so overwhelming it brought her to her knees. He knelt down in front of her, still holding her hand. "Do you trust me?" "I don't know how." "Then let me show you." He looked into her eyes with an intensity that made her feel like he could see every broken piece of her soul. "You've been angry at me for a long time, and that's okay. I can handle your anger, but Sarah, you need to know something. I never left you, not for 1 second, not even when you stopped believing in me. I was there, and I'm here now, and I'm going to get you out of that mountain." "How?" "You'll see, but first I need you to do something for me." "What? When you get out, and you will get out, I need you to tell people what happened, not because I need the credit, but because there are so many people who feel exactly like you did, buried and forgotten and convinced that I don't care. And I need them to know that I do. I need them to know that I see them, that I hear them, that I've never stopped loving them even when they stopped loving me. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. He squeezed her hand one more time. It's time to go back now. Wait, I don't want to go back. It hurts. I can't breathe there. I know, but Emma needs you, and I need you to trust me. And then everything went white. Sarah gasped, and her eyes flew open, but there was still only darkness and mud and crushing pressure. For a moment she thought it had all been a dream, a dying hallucination, and despair crashed over her like a wave. But then she felt it, warmth spreading through her chest, not physical warmth, but something else, something that felt like hope, and she heard his voice, not out loud, but inside her mind, clear as a bell. Hold on. And then the mountain moved, not all at once, but slowly, deliberately, like something was pushing it from below. Sarah felt the pressure on her chest ease just slightly, enough that she could take a deeper breath, and then another, and she realized with shock that air was coming in from somewhere. The mud around her face was shifting, pulling away, and she could feel cool air on her skin. "What's happening?" she whispered. The ground beneath her started to rise, slowly at first and then faster, and Sarah felt herself being lifted, pushed upward through the layers of mud and debris like she was in an elevator. It was impossible, completely impossible. The laws of physics didn't work like this, but it was happening. She was moving, she was rising, and then suddenly the pressure was gone, and light, blessed light, was pouring in from above. Sarah opened her eyes fully and saw that she was in some kind of vertical shaft, a perfectly round tunnel through the mud that led straight up to the surface, about 15 feet above her. The walls of the tunnel were smooth, almost polished, and they weren't collapsing or caving in. They were just holding, impossibly holding. And at the top of the tunnel, standing in the rain with his hand extended down toward her, was him, Jesus, exactly as he'd looked in the field. "Come on," he said with that same gentle smile. "I've got you." Sarah reached up with her left hand, the only one she could move, and even though he was 15 feet above her, the moment she stretched toward him, she felt his hand close around hers, strong and warm and real. He pulled, and Sarah rose up out of the mud like she weighed nothing at all, floating up through the tunnel until her feet touched solid ground at the surface. She stood there in the rain, covered in mud, gasping for air, and looked around. The entire hillside had collapsed. Her house was completely buried under at least 20 feet of debris, and trees were scattered like toothpicks across the landscape. But she was standing there, alive, breathing, and in front of her was Jesus, soaking wet from the rain, looking at her with so much love. It made her chest ache. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," he corrected gently. "You trusted me." Sarah fell to her knees in the mud, not from exhaustion, but from overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." He knelt down in front of her one more time. "Remember what I asked you to do." "I will. I promise. I'll tell everyone." "Not everyone will believe you. Some will think you're crazy. Some will try to find rational explanations. But that's okay. You just tell the truth about what happened here." "I will." He touched her forehead gently, like a blessing. "Go get your daughter. She's been asking about you." And then he was gone. Not walking away, not fading, just gone like he'd never been there, except Sarah knew, she knew with absolute certainty, that he had been, that he was real, that everything he'd said was true. She looked down at the tunnel behind her, the impossible vertical shaft through solid mud that should not exist, and she started to cry, not from sadness, but from joy and wonder, and the overwhelming realization that she had been wrong, so wrong, about everything. 15 minutes later, Sarah was walking down the muddy road toward Mrs. Callahan's house when she saw the emergency vehicles, fire trucks and ambulances and police cars with their lights flashing. Someone must have seen the landslide and called it in. A paramedic spotted her and came running. Ma'am, are you okay? Were you in that house?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak yet. "How did you get out?" the paramedic asked, looking at her in disbelief. "We just got here 5 minutes ago. There's no way you could have dug yourself out." Sarah just shook her head. "I didn't. He pulled me out." "Who pulled you out?" "Jesus," Sarah said simply. The paramedic looked at her like she'd hit her head. "Ma'am, you might be in shock. Let's get you to the ambulance." They checked her over, cleaned her up, and miraculously found nothing wrong except some bruising and minor cuts. "This doesn't make sense," one of the EMTs said to his partner. "She was buried under that slide for at least an hour, maybe 2. There's no way she should be alive, let alone basically uninjured." "Miracles happen," Sarah said quietly. They let her go to Mrs. Callahan's house, and when Emma saw her, she ran across the yard and threw herself into Sarah's arms. "Mommy, Mrs. Callahan said there was a big mudslide. Were you scared?" Sarah held her daughter tight, breathing in the smell of her hair. "I was, baby. I was really scared. But someone very special helped Mommy, and now we're okay." "Who helped you?" "I'll tell you when you're older. But right now, let's just say that God is real, and He loves us very much." And in the days that followed, the news spread quickly about the woman who survived being buried alive in a landslide. Engineers and geologists came to examine the site, and what they found made no sense at all. There was a perfectly cylindrical shaft through the debris, about 3 feet in diameter, going straight down about 15 feet to where Sarah had been trapped. The walls of the shaft were smooth and stable, showing no signs of erosion or collapse, and there was no equipment that could have created it. No drill, no excavator, nothing. "This is impossible," one of the engineers told a local news crew. "This kind of formation doesn't occur naturally, especially not in fresh mud. It should have collapsed immediately, but the walls are almost like they were fired in a kiln. They're solid, and we can't explain it." Sarah was interviewed dozens of times, and every single time she told the exact same story without changing a single detail. She described the field, the conversation, the promise, and the hand that pulled her out. Some people believed her immediately, some were skeptical but intrigued, and some dismissed it as trauma-induced hallucination. But Sarah didn't care what they thought because she knew what she'd experienced. The local church asked her to speak on Sunday, and she did, standing up in front of a congregation of strangers and telling them about the moment she'd given up, the moment she'd been met by Jesus, and the moment he'd literally moved a mountain to save her. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the building, and 3 people came forward that day to accept Christ because they'd heard her story and something in them had shifted. Today, 5 years later, Sarah and Emma live in a small house on the other side of town, and Sarah works at that same diner but with a different perspective. She prays every day, not out of habit but out of genuine relationship, and she talks to people about God whenever they seem open to it, not in a pushy way, but in a way that says, "I know He's real, because I met Him." Emma is 9 now, and she knows the whole story, and sometimes at night she asks her mum to tell it again, and Sarah does, and they pray together, thanking God for His protection. And where Sarah's old house used to stand, where the mountain came down, the county put up a small memorial marker with a simple inscription that reads, "On this site, October 2019, Sarah Mitchell was saved from certain death. The method of her rescue remains unexplained." But Sarah knows, and everyone who's heard her story knows, it wasn't unexplained at all. It was God, moving in ways that defy logic and reason, reaching down into the darkness to pull one of his children into the light. If you're hearing this story right now, and you feel buried under the weight of your life, if you feel forgotten and abandoned and convinced that God doesn't see you or care about you, I need you to know something that Sarah learned that day in the mud. He does see you, he does care. He's been there the whole time, even when you couldn't feel him. And when you least expect it, when it seems like there's no way out, he will move heaven and earth to save you. Because that's what he does. That's who he is. He's the God who rescues, who redeems, who reaches into impossible places and pulls his children out into the light. Don't give up. He hasn't given up on you.